I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story, home to the one and only story cycle system. Do you want people to actually give a crap about you and your purpose-driven company? Then our proven system will help you tell them a better friggin' story. And that's the secret sauce, folks. You gotta have a better, clear story. You can get started right now by downloading your 64-page DIY brand story strategy workbook at businessofstory.com. It's filled with examples, links to tutorial videos, and will help you clarify your story to grow your revenue and amplify your impact. And if you're really proud of how your brand story comes together, let me know. We might put you on our show to share your new narrative with the world. So download your story cycle guide right now as you listen to today's show.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Do you feel like you have a voice in politics these days? Do you feel like your story is being heard? Do you think your representatives are actually representing you, your family, and your friends? Well, in this day of extreme polarization between the right and the left, the conservatives and the liberals, Fox News and CNN, it's hard for the bell curve of Americans to rise above the noise and be recognized, let alone actually impact policy. Well, what if you had a completely apolitical, troll-free online town square where you could go to research important issues, cast your vote, and recast it if your mind gets changed in the process, and finally have your voice count? This would be an online community, completely free of super PACs, power brokers, and companies small and large wielding their influence. All you have to be is a registered voter. And guess what? Your party affiliation will not matter. In fact, the site won't even ask for it. Well, our guest today is in a unique position with a storied background to create such a democratized place online where we can have thoughtful and civic conversations around the issues that affect us all. And believe it or not, it is being created right now. Richard Lang began his unsuspecting career in politics in college when, in the early 1970s, he helped propel a movement forward that came up with a ridiculous name for a new junior college sports mascot, voted on and approved by the students, all to focus attention on corruption at the highest level in the school. And guess what? It worked. They won. The name is still around today, and many of those leaders at that time lost their jobs because of Richard's work. Well, after that, Richard went on to do some other amazing things. He revolutionized the video cassette recorder world. Now, for those of you that don't know what that is, that's how we used to watch movies at home with these big, clunky magnetic tape cassettes that we would plug in, and it was the greatest thing in the world to be able to watch this stuff at home. Well, anyways, he and his partner created the dual deck VCR. This was the stepping stone for Richard and his team to invent an online compression technology that made current audio and video streaming possible. Without them, you may not have had iTunes and Microsoft's movie player as soon as you did. Well, this technology was so ahead of its time that Microsoft tried to co-op it, only to lose a multi-million-dollar trademark infringement case to Richard's company. Well, Richard went on to launch Collaborate in 2010, which has provided academia with a powerful online classroom that has taken off around the world. Now, he's just published his very first book called Virtual Country, a strategy for 21st century democracy, about his reasoning behind an approach to making the national townsquare.us platform a reality so that you, your voice, and your stories can and will be heard among our political leadership. So here now on the Business of Story, with his story and ways for you to get involved, is Richard Lane. Hey, Richard, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks very much, Park. Appreciate you inviting me.
Well, it's so great. We go back a long, long way, but I haven't seen you in a while. So when I got your email a couple of weeks ago about your new book and your new movement, Virtual Country, read the book, I said, man, I got to get you on the show. Not only are you one of the first true storytellers that I met in my life down here in Arizona, but then what you've done with it and actually the impact you and your companies have had on all of our lives when it comes right down to streaming media and even going back to the old VCR days. So we're going to cover all of that in today's show. Just great to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Park. You're very kind.
All right. So you are a doer. You are a guy that's made a lot of stuff happen in your life. I want you, before we do anything, I want you to take us to a scene or a moment in your life, probably back in childhood, that something went down that shapes who you are today. As the entrepreneur, as the civic-minded engagement person you are today. Can you take us to a story?
Yeah, I as a matter of fact, when I was 30 years old, I had gone through basically a decade of entrepreneuring combined with kind of normal jobs working for people in various capacities. And, during that time, I produced a dozen or so music concerts in the greater Phoenix area. I had a marketing and advertising business, and I helped a couple of companies grow their businesses. But throughout that time, I was very, very disillusioned with business in general. I mean, I didn't like it. I didn't like people being motivated solely by profit. I guess it was, I was coming off of just the idealism of the 20s, of being in my 20s. And I had worked for a guy who I considered basically a sociopath. And finally, even though he was paying me okay, I just decided I can't take it anymore. I have to quit. I don't know what's coming next, but I don't even care. I just have to get out of here. So the person that I was living with at the time and I, we had a house together. We sold it and had just enough money left to do what was our dream at that time, which is to see Europe, right? So sold the house, didn't get too much more, but enough to make that trip. And for 5 weeks, we traveled in Europe, and I went back to see where I was born, which was in Casablanca, French Morocco. It was a French colony at the time. My father was French. My mother was Sephardic Moroccan. And anyway, so we left, no more job, enough money to do the trip. And while we were there traveling, we met some young people that were our age, young Moroccan men, and they were so warm and friendly and accommodating. And, we got a chance to get to know them on the trip from southern Spain to Casablanca, where I was born. But it was a long, 6-hour train ride, and we got sick during that ride. Anyway, when we got to Casablanca at 1 a.m, a couple of these wonderful human beings took us, even though by that point we were getting sick and the room was starting to spin, and they found a hotel for us. They got us checked in. We spent the first 4 days of our trip sick as dogs, but finally when we could get around, we got to know these people. They took us around, showed us stuff. And I realized how smart they were. I mean, these were, they were sort of like, they had no jobs really to speak of. They didn't have much money, but they were warm, welcoming. And by the time it was over, I thought to myself, on the way home 5 weeks later, I thought to myself, wow, if my parents hadn't moved to the United States when I was 2 years old, despite whatever intelligence or capabilities or talent I might have, I would never have had the opportunity that I have now, that they don't have, these new friends. So it gave me sort of a renewed appreciation for what I could make of myself. And I said to myself, okay, as much as I hate business, I'm going to devote 1 year just 1 year, and I'm really going to give it my all. No holds barred. We only had about $1,400 left when we came back, enough to get an apartment. We had sold all of our furniture, so we had a table and 4 chairs and a few boxes, and I felt wonderful. I didn't know what was coming next. Here's where the magic comes in. Almost out of the blue, I had run into a fellow that I had known. We had a mutual client, Terry Dunlap, and the two of us ran into each other at a stoplight. We rolled the windows down, said, "Hey, let's get together." Make a longer story short, within 2 weeks of my return to Phoenix, we had closed a $240,000 deal to create some videos and marketing materials for a client that Terry had run into. And, it's a longer story. I could spend an hour on that story. But the point being, it jump-started our business. And from that, with the profits that we had, we started a company that in Phoenix, I know you heard of Go Video. And, we had, during that same 2-week period when I'd come back from Morocco, we came up with the idea for the dual-deck video cassette recorder, which later put Go Video on the map. So, as stories go, that was a turning point in my life. I had just turned 30 years old, and I came back, and the 1 year turned into, the last, 30 plus. So.
Well, and that then led into what you did in the streaming world, where you won a lawsuit against Microsoft, as I understand it, made some money there, but then kickstarted you into the civic causes, civic engagements. We'll get to all that, folks, but this is the kind of colorful life that Richard has led. I met you about this time, a little bit after that, but let's jump back even a little bit earlier in your life. And this was in the early 1970s. You are going to school at Scottsdale Community College, the Maricopa Community College System, by the way, which I believe is still the largest community college system in the country. Very, very powerful group of people run that organization. But you were there, editor-in-chief of the newspaper. And it's when you really started getting involved in civic things, when you saw some sort of unjust decisions going down about money. Do we keep this money and invest it into our schools, or do we invest it into our sports programs? Why don't you quickly take us through what happened there and how the school is known today by its mascot?
Well, when after graduating high school in California, where I grew up in the greater Los Angeles area, I had been accepted to UCLA, Pepperdine, Occidental, a bunch of good schools. And my parents bought a house in Scottsdale. I went to check it out over the summer, and I ended up falling in love with Scottsdale Community College. It was instead of looking forward to 400 people in a class, I was going to be in class with 15. And anyway, while there, I was directed to journalism. I did, as you say, get involved in writing about what was going on there. And what was happening at that time was it was a new school, and the district administration had proudly proclaimed that this was going to be the model of democracy in Arizona, or a model for all schools. I thought that's pretty cool. But at the same time, the way that they wanted to do that is to give the student government full authority over spending the student activities fees, which were a couple $1 million a year, right? And so what had happened is the student government right before me had allocated a dozen or so scholarships for Native American Indian students who lived on the very reservation the school was on. The administration decided that they wanted those scholarships for out-of-state recruited athletes that they could bring in, and essentially it was the makings of a farm team for the ASU and U of A, and it was in violation of a bunch of laws. And so it probably would have gone unnoticed, except that the administration at the Model of Democracy School simply commandeered those scholarships, gave them to the athletes, took them away from the Native Americans, and the students were incensed, and I thought we had authority, and the administration said, listen, stick to things that are more like traditional, like picking a mascot for the school because it's a new school.
Oh, those were loaded directions.
Well, the thing is, it was a handful of students, a larger handful of faculty and some administrators got together one day for nominations. And, one of the things that I and a couple other students suggested is, and a wonderful teacher, my mentor, Bob Winters, suggested, is the artichoke and pink and white as the colors. So, there were other nominations. It went to a vote, and artichoke won, by a long shot, like 70% of the vote. It could have been the end of it, except so it happened. It made news internationally because it was so weird, and that was before the days of the internet, right? But what really put it into hyperdrive is the administration declared the election null and void within an hour or two of the results, and that got everybody, literally around the world, contacting us like, "What's this about?" And because of that, they found out about this underlying issue that was going on, which was, they were hiding tax dollars being secretly spent to run this, athletic farm program in basketball primarily, out of all the community colleges. And over the course of time, 11 deans got fired, and that things changed. There was a subsequent election. But anyway, the point is, it ended up being the mascot. But the real point of all that was that I got a taste of what it. It's one thing to say democracy; it's another thing to actually stand for it. And at that time, that district did not stand for it, and the students, and more importantly, the entire community, including the Arizona Republic and the Scottsdale Progress, took our side. And so for a couple of years, a lot came out, and it was my training. I realized I got a better education there, hands-on, than I ever would have gotten, at any of the other schools that I would have been at.
And today, Scottsdale Community College is still known as the Fighting Artichokes. I don't think they're pink and white anymore. I believe they're green and white to go more with the artichoke theme, but they've got the greatest mascot going. I'm a proud wearer of the Fighting Artichoke t-shirt. Well, then you ran for the board seat there with all of $124 in your war chest, and you almost unseated a incumbent there who spent thousands upon thousands of dollars to retain a seat. So that was really your first entree into politics. And in your book, you said in your first page is your dad said, "Richard, don't ever go into politics." Yet
right.
Here you
are.
Well,
he saw me for a year. I'd gone from editor of the SEC newspaper to student body president, which is something I didn't want, but we needed a spokesperson. But, throughout that time, my dad was proud of me at the time. But later, when I was out of school, he saw I was really into, politics. And he did tell me, it's all rigged. It doesn't matter which side you're on. It's basically kabuki theater. And I doubted him at the time. And what's kind of funny is I think he was right. A lot of what we've seen sort of emerge that was hidden before in the last couple of years is really the way in which the system is rigged. It's rigged in multiple ways, but it's not all nefarious. It's just that the way we've evolved as a country, we have a system of government that the founding fathers never imagined. I can't believe they would have imagined the internet and fake news and instant electronic access and connection and social networks. So a lot of the problems that have really soiled our democracy and allowed, in particular, big money to corrupt, to have a corrupting influence on the system, these weren't things that were envisioned 240 some years ago. So we find ourselves now at a very interesting crossroads, which is, what my book is about. I mean, for the last 240 plus years, we've had three branches of government, right? What's been missing that entire time, and it's because it was really never possible, is for the citizens themselves, for we the people, to have an ongoing daily advisory voice, a coherent collective voice, advisory voice on the issues that matter to us. That technically has only been possible for the last 10, 12 years or so. And it was that realization that led to the initiative that's featured in my book and the strategy that I call the virtual country strategy, which is really, instead of just fighting within the system, instead of resisting, we can still do those things, but we have an opportunity to do something in parallel that can really be what I like to think of as the evolution of the revolution of 1776.
So what do you call this fourth category? We've got the branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial, and what would be this new fourth?
Well, I suppose it's what you could call it is the voice, the people's voice. In a sense, it's a virtual branch, the people's branch. It's a branch that is citizen-led, that would be non-governmental, non-profit, nonpartisan, but would do one thing in particular, and maybe thinking of it as a branch isn't as direct as thinking of it as a mechanism, a new mechanism that can be built now, and that is one that enables citizens to open a secure voting account, as secure as your bank account. And the only thing that would be known about a citizen is that they're a real citizen and the zip code they live in. And with that voting account, it would enable citizens themselves to identify issues that they want to weigh in on. And, we're not talking about every single day or, like weighing in on 100 things. We're talking about important things that come up. Wow, this is in the news, or this is being contemplated by our representatives. We want to have a say, and be able to do that without having to wait 2 years to elect somebody that we hope will do that. We just have never had a place at the table, and it's because it's never been possible before. Right. So now it's technically possible.
It's sort of a virtual gathering, a virtual town square, as you call it. But before we jump totally in that, let's talk a little bit more, because you have such an interesting background that leads to this. I mean, you were an activist to help get the artichoke landed at Scottsdale Community College. You were an editor-in-chief of a magazine, a storyteller. You promoted music, so you have a good sense of the populace, and what pop culture is all about. You've been advertising, marketing. You and Terry Dunlap did something pretty amazing in the tech world. You started Go Video, but created this dual deck VCR. Now, in this day and age, it might seem like it's rather antiquated, but back in the day, it was the thing where you could have a VCR, plug it in, and you could record VCR to VCR. And I know a lot of people now think that's like numb, but it was mind-boggling back then. You guys built that up, sold them around the world. And then that led into the work you did in streaming media and the inventions that you had, some patents that you held there that helped, was the precursor to iTunes and Microsoft's media player. So you now taking all of that, and what were you in the early 40s, late 30s when you started that particular company and ultimately winning a suit against Microsoft?
That took place in my late 30s, I believe. I mean, that company we formed, we originally called it Explore Technology. It later became known as Burst.com. And that was formed in 1990. We were fortunate enough to secure an initial seed investment from the rock band U2. They provided us with $2 million back in 1990.
And how in the world did you track them down to give you $2 million for this?
Well, that's a great question. Well, it was a lot of serendipity involved. We had my wife Lisa and I we had met in 19. Well, we had known each other for about 10 years. We started our relationship really at the end of '87, and we also wanted to work together. And we started in video publishing. This is right after I had left Go Video, so the dual deck video cassette was kind of behind me. And what we were working on was another idea I had for a way that video and audio could be efficiently moved around in electronic networks, such that it solved the problem at that time, which was pixelated, start and stop video. It was a horrible video. Microsoft couldn't solve that problem. Real networks couldn't solve that problem, and we did through the invention that I had patented. So we were looking for investors to turn that into something. While we were waiting, we were doing video publishing, and we had met an author by the name of Marilyn Ferguson, who's passed on now, but she wrote an amazing bestseller in the 80s called The Aquarian Conspiracy. And it was really about the awakening of consciousness around the world and people who were doing amazing things in different areas starting to connect. And so we wanted to do a video about that book. We met Marilyn, became friends, and she had a new book coming out, and she said, I'd like you to do a video about that. It's sort of the follow-on. We said, okay. We sold the rights to that book to French television network, FR3. And we traveled to France to sign the papers and get underway with that. And while we were there, Marilyn called us and said, hey, Richard, Lisa, could you guys pop over to London? My son-in-law is working with the BBC, and the BBC is interested in the English-speaking rights of this film on my upcoming book. Could you talk to him? I said, yeah, sure. So, we got a plane. We headed over to London. When we got there, the guy from the BBC stood us up, never showed up for the meeting. So we ended up spending a couple of days with Marilyn's son-in-law chatting about this and that and what we were doing. And he's a musician like I am. We had that in common, told him about everything. And then when we were getting ready to leave, we were sitting in a little lounge at the airport having a beer. And, about 15 minutes before leaving, and he says, hey, you guys doing anything else other than the video publishing? And we said, well, now that you mention it, we have this patent that we've just filed that for video for making video on demand possible and audio on demand. And he said, tell me more about that. And we told him about it. And he said, I know somebody who might be interested in investing in that. We said, who's that? And he said, you too. And we looked at each other like, yeah, right. And he said, no, seriously, could you send me a business plan? And I said, we don't have a business plan. This is like so early. This is not going to manifest for at least another 5 or 6 years. I said, I don't care. Just send me what you got. Write something up. So we came home after our trip and spent a few days, and I wrote up basically what was a 14-page, we call it a vision statement. It was sort of a look forward to what we thought was going to happen in communications, and in particular with distribution of video and audio. And we sent that along and figured we'll never hear from this again. And then, a few weeks later, he said, "Hey, one of the financial managers for the band, this fellow Ozzy, would like to talk with you. He's going to be in California. He wants to stop by Arizona and have a presentation." So we thought, okay. So we mobilized. He came by. We spent about 3 hours explaining everything, and at the end, he said, "This is so interesting, but I'm not very technical, and this is." What you would be asking me to do is to spend money way outside of the parameters that I've just established for the band. So I said, okay, but fine. It was great to meet you. Thank you. He left. We figured it was over. A couple of weeks later, we get another call. Hey, Ozzy's sending over. He wants you to meet with his accounting guy. And he said, okay, he's a licensing and accounting guy. So another fellow by the name of Melly Modi, wonderful Indian man, came out, spent about 3 days with us. He said, this is really great, but you're not asking for enough money. We were at the time looking for $700,000. And he said, you need $2 million. We said, oh, okay. So we'll argue with that. So he said helped us put together the financials and a business plan. He took them back, and the next thing we knew, we were invited to Dublin to sign a deal for U2 to invest $2 million. 2 months after that, Ozzy came back with our first installment of about $250,000, and we were in business.
And away you went with Explorer Technology.
I'll never forget Michelle and I. By the way, folks, my wife Michelle worked with Richard back at Go Video days, so that's how I got to meet Richard and Terry. And we were literally one night, I think I was watching a video, a tape on your VCR deck, and she got off the phone with you, and she goes, "Oh, that was Richard." And I said, "What's Richard up to these days?" And he goes, "Well, he's just invented this way of being able to stream, I guess, push movies through like a telephone line, and then you can plug it into your computer and you can watch it there." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, but it's not really going to come around for another 5 or 6 years." And I go, "Okay, whatever, wake me when that happens." But it's like you were way ahead of the game there. And so that's what led into Explorer technology.
Yeah, we called it Explorer. Then it changed names a few times. Then it became instant video technologies. And then, we hired so-called professional CEOs to help with the company. Unfortunately, they always seemed to not work out. And then I kept getting asked by the board of directors to come back and take over. So I did. And so the company changed pretty much each time that happened. And so eventually we became burst.com, and it became 100% network optimization. And we created a plugin to the Windows Media Player that fixed the problems that Microsoft had. And they were going to license from us, and we thought, "Oh, this is exciting." We spent about almost 2 years talking to them, and then behind the scenes, we had lined up these great clients: Excite at Home, which is a big cable provider, Yahoo, SBC Communications, and no one knew about those things yet. So Microsoft said to us, well, first they were sort of upset with us because we had a meeting and they had just made like a $450 million acquisition of what they call an edge caching companies just to address the problem that was still plaguing them. And we were in a meeting in Redmond, and they said, "So you mean to tell us we just pissed away $450 million? And I said, "Yeah, I'm sorry."
Yes,
and you did, because you don't have to do that. They said, "Okay, well then, we want to know who your so-called secret customers are and what they're doing and why." And so we went ahead and crafted a very, special non-disclosure agreement that limited what they could talk about and yada, yada. They found talked to all of our people. And then the next thing we knew, every customer we had lined up walked away from us. And we had, at that point, we were a small public company. We had a secondary offering, an $80 million offering lined up, and the underwriter walked away and wouldn't even return our calls. And all of a sudden, we went from having a business that was taking off. We had about 110 people at the time in San Francisco. And suddenly, it's just, we were just drained of cash rapidly because our flow was cut off. Our customers walked away. Nobody would talk to us. And my wife, Lisa, I'd come home. She said, "Well, there's something's going on. You're not telling me something." I said, "I swear, I have no idea." And we didn't have any idea. So, short of it is we ended up laying off 107 out of 110 people. There were just a couple, 2.5 employees left, working for, almost nothing. We were very, very fortunate. We had one investor in particular who had come on board in 1992 who believed in us and our patents, and he financed our operations, very small, a little 400 square foot office, while we, kind of regrouped. And thinking we were out of business, Microsoft, 6 months later, Bill Gates came out and announced a new solution for the Windows Media Player that they called Fast Stream. We called ours Burst. So theirs was Fast Stream. And
they just knocked you off.
They just stole it straight up. And within a couple hours, we received phone calls from around the country from law firms and writers who knew about Burst and said, "Hey, aren't they announcing what you are doing or we're doing?" And so, we picked 2 law firms, great firms. Spencer Hosey in San Francisco was our lead attorney. We sued Microsoft, and 3 years later, we caught them basically destroying evidence, and they settled and took a patent license for $60 million, which we distributed to our shareholders, and our lawyers, of course, got a big piece, but it was worth it. It wasn't a lot of money to Microsoft, but it was, the principle of it. And And it left us enough money to launch what would become, we changed the company's name, Democrasoft. And that was really when, after a very long wait, we had some funds to start to build out the vision that's in my book, which had, by the way, been evolving in parallel this entire time. I mean, over 30 years, believe it or not, as circumstances in the world of government and politics evolved, and as technology evolved, so did the strategy. But it was never quite its time yet, and we tried to get other people to help us build a universal voting and collaboration platform, and we could never find anybody willing to put money into civic engagement. So we put our own money into it.
So, Richard, this is what I'm talking about. You have such a fascinating backstory that's leading to all of this. And now that Burst is over, you've won against Microsoft. You've got money you're able to pay out to your shareholders, to your attorneys, and then you had some seed money for your next adventure and venture, which yours are always adventures. And this led to Collaboratize, correct?
Collaboratize.
Collaboratize. Sorry about that. Collaboratize.
Yeah, no problem. That would be the name of the platform, the collaboration platform that we created at Democrasoft. We started working on it in early 2009. We released it in 2010, and we originally wanted it to be about civic engagement, but that's, as you can understand, that's not an area typically where people have been known to make money. And in part, at that time, in 2010, the country was happy, right? I mean, for the most part, you didn't have a lot of, some people weren't happy, obviously, with Barack Obama, but there was a sense of, okay, after the Bush years, a lot of people were worried, and putting aside which side of the aisle one might be on, it was just an era of complacency. So there was not demand for kind of the civic engagement aspect. But what did happen is once we put our platform out there, and we did it, it was a free platform. Initially, it was, based on, and still, it's still free. It was based on the eyeball model, which was, real networks and a bunch of others, the idea that the more people you get, then eventually that becomes monetizable. And what happened with us is educators found out about Collaboratize, and they just started using it. And this came out of right field because that was never one of the markets we expected.
And how are they using it?
Well, what they were doing is they would have their normal classroom activities, and then they would assign the students after school to go home and click on a link for particular or several links that would connect them with our product, which was these topic-based collaborative discussions. And they weren't just discussions; they were structured discussions. So, think of it as a module where in it the teacher would have, okay, here's the question. Here's here's some context or the instructions. Here's an attachment, and typically it went something like instructions. Students go home. We're studying the Civil War. Watch this video about the Civil War or read this paper that's attached. Then answer the following question, and it could be multiple choice, yes or no, ranked priorities, whatever, and then explain down below how you got to your answer and who you agree with in your class and who do you disagree with and why. And they put that out, and the very first teacher who used it came into our office in Santa Rosa and literally welled up saying, I have students that I've had for a couple of years that always sit at the back of the room. They never participate. They never raise their hand. They went home. They engaged on your platform. And when they came in the next day, their hands were the first ones up. And she said, that's a miracle. And that word got out that this was a way of engaging students because they felt.
And do you think that was the change in how students, kids, millennials back then, I guess it'd be more like the Gen Xers, Gen Ys growing up with being online and communicating online, and it just kind of helped give them a platform in which they were more comfortable to engage with?
Well, that's right. I mean, in other words, it was a safe space. It was after school, so nobody was watching them. Because they couldn't see the other students, they weren't concerned about, does the does the artist feel comfortable sitting next to the jock or the hippie kid? All that stuff just fell away. All they see is, here's a name of a fellow student, and here's what they're saying, and here's what I can say back. And it's no pressure. It's on their own time. So it was really, really engaging. And we recognized at that point that what we had really uncovered, which would apply to more than just education, was a way of engaging people within a safe, secure, limited space. And it ended up that more than 74,000 teachers around the world registered and started using our platform starting in 2011.
And do you realize you're that French Moroccan helping these total strangers out, communicating, connecting with them, just like you experienced back in your trip in your early 30s? It's kind of funny how history repeats itself that way.
It is. Obviously, I became an American citizen when I was 4, but yes, in terms of culturally, my
exactly that's right. Yeah, but you've always had a different outlook. It's, to me anyways, when I met you back in the Go Video days, you always had this outlook of, but how could we actually connect people and help people? And we have a product here that does that, and sure, we can make some money on it, but I never got the sense you were about the money. You were always about this democratizing of communication and enabling people to do that. So when you get the big bad Microsoft that shows up and steals your idea, you're like, whoa, wait a minute, no fair. That's not going to work for me. And you take them to court, you win. And so now here you are really expressing, at least in my opinion, what you're about, pulling together your whole background in journalism and writing and branding and marketing, and now you've got Polarized well underway. So how did that then move you into what you're doing today? And again, folks, this book, Virtual Country, Strategy for 21st Century Democracy, is really well worth your read. When you're done with it, you're going to be reaching out to Richard and say, I volunteer. What can I do to help? So how did this move you into where you are today?
Well, during the entire time that we were doing, Democrasoft and Polarized and all that, in parallel, I as we've been discussing, I had this kind of passion really for democracy, and I can't really tell you why that is. So it's always felt to me almost like Dharma. It's just a bizarre interest in it, and it was certainly enlivened by my time at Scottsdale Community College, and Bob Winters, my late mentor, just was such a profound influence on me in such a positive way. So that always stayed with me. And in the mid '90s. You remember I mentioned Marilyn Ferguson, the author, who sent us.
Yes.
So she also had she and her partner Ray Gottlieb had a publication called the Brain Mind Bulletin, and it was like cutting edge consciousness and science where they meet. And she found out about one of the ideas that I had come up with called the virtual budget, which was, again, pre-internet. It was an idea for, hey, what if when we file our tax forms, we get to file an extra form, one page, that shows a list of all the categories that federal dollars are spent in, with an allocation by percentage of, here's the percent of the budget that goes to that. And then you would simply fill out an extra column, which is, here's the way I'd like to see those percentages allocated, still adding up to 100%. And finally, the third column after the first year, which would say, well, here's what, the consensus of the people was, right next to what, we're actually doing. She published that for me. And in the mid '90s, I was on a camping trip with my three best buddies, really. And we were talking at the end of a day, and I was telling them about that and about the idea of having a virtual impact. And that, by the way, came from Marilyn Ferguson, because originally I think my orientation was what people today would refer to as direct democracy. This movement where, we citizens have a direct, a vote, a real vote that really counts on, bills and issues and all that. And I never could quite come to the conclusion that was ever going to happen. And the main reason was because in order for that to happen, we'd have to change our system of government, and the very people who are really kind of hamstrung by the influence of big money in politics would be the ones that would be required to change the rules. And I realized that's never going to happen. But what Marilyn pointed out, and that's how my realization came about, she said, it doesn't have to be binding. It can be advisory. It can be non-binding and advisory. And what's more important is not how people are voting on something, it's how many are showing up. And so in the mid-90s with my buddies, we were like, you know what? There's this thing called the internet that's taken off. And imagine with the internet how we might be able to enable citizens to assemble easily and quickly, and more importantly, in very huge numbers. That technology is coming. It wasn't fully there in 1996 when this conversation took place, but it was coming. And so, for the next 10, 12 years or so, it's amazing to be even thinking in those long windows. But we evolved the idea, and several of us in particular, spent a lot of time developing sort of the fundamentals of what would be known in my book as the virtual country strategy. And and then when, later Microsoft came about, we tested the technology and we created technology that would actually enable the vision that we had, discussed in originally 1983 with Marilyn, and then 1996 with my buddies, and then, finally in 2010 we put code to it and used our own money to do so because no one else would do it. And by the way, we had an effort where prior to Microsoft building this, back when we were in the middle of litigation with Microsoft, or maybe it was Apple by that point, that we had an opportunity to prototype these things, but we needed some money, and we thought, well, let's apply for grants, and we applied to 14 different outlets whose it looked like what they were looking for is exactly what we had, and all of them turned us down. No, sorry. And I think part of the reason was, the time wasn't right. So that's why when we finally got money at Microsoft, we thought, well, shoot, if nobody else will do it, let's just do it ourselves. And we did.
Now, how is this different than polling? So you've got non-binding feedback from the citizenry about what they care about and what they don't care about. Aren't the both parties already doing this through polling?
Well, yes, but it's very, very different. And so there's really two questions packed together in what you just said. So the first one I'll address is, how's it different than polling? Just fundamentally, okay, polling is taking an infinitesimally small percentage of the general citizenry, like 0.00000%, 1,000 people out of 320 million. And it's asking them, how they feel about something. And then it takes those results and it extrapolates. It says, oh, well, based on this, group, this is what the country believes. And it plays well for media, right? It plays well for media, but it's gone in one news cycle. And politicians, it's useful if you want to get a sense of, okay, what's my constituency feeling? But it's not democracy because nobody's involved. No citizen has actually got a skin in the game. They didn't vote. Nobody voted. So there's that. And then the other part.
And it's useful for the politician, too, because it allows them to create a soundbite around whatever they've learned there that they can respond to it, hopefully get some attention and move on. And you even say in your book that he who or she who controls the narrative basically controls and influences the people. So this is a way of kind of handing that narrative back to the people and saying, wait a minute, you need to hear our story about what we really believe in this.
That's right. And, and something, the other part of your question has to do with the parties and with partisanship. And this is one of the most important parts of this whole conversation, in my view. And that is that, we've been trained to think in terms of a two-party system. But back when the founders were setting up this country, there was significant disagreement on that idea. I mean, there was probably the predominantly the people that we think as legends as our founding fathers were saying, no, we do, this is the worst thing that this country could do is set up a two-party system. And what we have now is what I was just at a conference in New Orleans where a panel from Harvard called it the partisan industrial complex. And basically what it is it's a system that we're all trained in where, what we call civic engagement is basically wait for 2 years and then vote for a candidate. And in the meantime, the two-party system makes sure they almost like divvy up issues, right? So it's designed to polarize us, and it's working quite well at that, I must say. So you meet someone who you might otherwise, it might be a neighbor that right? You relate for any number of reasons, and the one issue comes up that you are adamantly against them on, and the next question is, or assumption is, what party are you, right? And then once you determine, that's a Republican, or it's a Democrat, or that's a liberal, or that's a Tea Party, or whatever, you don't want to have anything more to do with them, so we end up not talking to each other. We end up polarized, and the alternative to that, which is made manifest in this idea of a new online national town square, is the idea that we can, in a safe, secure space online, and we should talk for a minute about who would run that, by the way. But in that space, it's possible to simply focus on issues, right? So in that space where the mechanism does not collect party affiliation, it's just other citizens. And so we look at one issue at a time. And in that safe space, we get to have fact-verified educational information that's been verified, by the way, by people on opposite sides of the issue that are at least agreeing that this is the facts, right? So what we start to do then is to have like a collection of positions on different issues as individuals, and we start to what I say in the book is that it filters for commonality, right? It does that by first attracting people who care about a particular issue, and then it does so by providing an opportunity to consider that issue in isolation of all other issues, so we don't become pushed away from each other. Now we become, citizens with a collection of views that we recognize. Hey, you know what? The person that I hated, I thought, because they disagreed on this one issue, turns out they actually agree with me on these other issues. And by the way, Park, polls, for one thing they are good at is they will tell us right now that on almost every issue, Americans agree. I mean, north of 80% of the major issues. So there's a disconnect, right? I mean, in truth, we disagree. The polls tell us that, but the polls have no power. They have no authority because they're not democracy. They're not an expression of democracy. They're an extrapolation of democracy. They're not even hardly that.
That's a great way of putting it. Not an expression of, but an extrapolation of. Now, let me ask you, if you are filtering for commonality, how do you avoid the echo chamber that people would argue commonality? Well, doesn't Facebook already filter for commonality, and therefore you have an interest in such and such, and I'm going to just feed you fake news or real news, depending on what echo chamber you're in?
Well, that's a great question, and it points to one of the real advantages of this strategy, because Facebook is a social network. Right. And as such, people have their profiles, their likes, their dislikes, they're sharing, they're posting news from wherever they get it. In the 2016 election, 65% of Americans got their news from social networks. And that's one reason that, all the so-called fake news phenomena was able to proliferate because, everybody could do what they wanted. But the National Town Square is not that. Think of it as a public utility, right? It's very granular. It's very specific. It does really just two things. The first thing is it provides a space that is trusted, where the only thing that happens is people learn about an issue and they weigh in on that issue. Okay, they can discuss that issue in a moderated discussion, but they're not allowed to copy and bring in links. They're not allowed to, reach out and, form communities inside of it. We talk about it as a walled garden. Inside the wall, just a very few functions that are easy to monitor, to control, and to keep the integrity of. Okay. Outside that wall, sure, you might have a voting issue. Let's say it's an issue on overturning Citizens United. People go to the town square, they vote, and then that voting module can be shared with other citizens who have registered to participate in the National Town Square. So if they want to use, Twitter or Facebook to share the module, they can do that. But whatever echo chamber might exist happens outside of that module. It happens outside of the square. And I go into a lot of detail on this in the book because it's an important question. But this is really an opportunity to reestablish trust in what would be a new national institution. And that's really what I'm proposing. I think that's an important distinction. It's not a new app. It's not a new product by Microsoft. Matter of fact, Microsoft doesn't even need to be involved. There's no direct requirement for anything we've done to be part of this vision, but it's all available, and we plan on licensing the intellectual property for free to the nonprofit, citizen-led steward organization that would be running and maintaining the integrity of this mechanism.
So you're not going to have the Koch brothers investing in this thing and then people wondering what is the integrity of the National Town Square.
Well, I have at the back of the book sort of one chart that sort of shows the relationship between the various stakeholders, let's put it. And there's a role for everybody, right? So in other words, the most important role is that of citizens showing up. But there's also a role for the public steward organization that's completely transparent in its operation. And what they do is they are pledged, even though these are individuals, it's probably going to end up being a couple dozen individuals initially. These are people that are well known in their particular field for their integrity, right? And it's not just politicians. This could be, artists, musicians, sports figures, educators, writers. What they have in common is two things. One, they're known for their integrity. And two, even if they have completely different, like currently political affiliations or views on individual issues, they are mutually pledged to the health, maintenance, and integrity of this new public institution. So, so this becomes a new start, another chance to have a trustworthy institution.
And this fourth institution, as you call it, which I like, by the way, as you say in your book, it provides the independence. It's a declaration of independence from the historical constraints of partisan politics. So it's this place where we're hoping then you get it up and running, that our representatives and their people will monitor it and pay attention to what the conversations really are happening around the different issues, even allowing people to vote on an issue. It's non-binding, but you will be running tallies of are they yay or nay for an issue, and even allowing people to go back and change their vote as they become more educated about it or hear other people's points of view. And the idea, I suppose, is it's a barometer of what we, the people, actually, truly, really think on an issue that is currently not being heard by our representatives.
Right. Is what we, the people, believe in. And again, the most important part of it is the participation level, right? Because let's say that an issue is put up there, and even 10 million people show up and vote on it. Well, that's important, I suppose, and you can see where those people were, but it's not compelling in the sense that some partisan group could have gotten their people to go out and vote early and make it look like their position is the popular one. It becomes an accurate barometer as more people show up, because these days it's now possible for every citizen to reach into virtually every citizen, I think the number is like 98%, can reach into their purse or their pocket, or a small percentage might have to go to the library to log in, but it's very easy to access. So the idea of having 150 million people show up because an issue is really important to them is no longer unrealistic. It is realistic, and also it can be over an extended window, right? So it doesn't have to be like what we're used to is on one day, right? You got to get a ride to the polls. You got to figure out, get time off of work. This is like, you might have 2 weeks to learn about an issue, to discuss it, to besides the fact verified information inside the National Town Square, you might want to go and, watch your favorite commentators on Fox News or on MSNBC or Bill Maher or wherever, and, get more points of view. It engages. But at the end of the day, the only person who has a vote is you, the verified citizen. No trolls, no bots, no automated, influencers. It's very clean, and that's why it's a fresh start. And by the way, you made a statement, Park, about government. This is not envisioned to be a government operation. This is a citizen-led initiative, and these have happened before. Look at the do not call list, right? Citizen-led initiative, 75 million people. That's an important number. 75 million people showed up and basically voted by saying, add my name. I don't want to be called by solicitors. In what was record time, we had bipartisan legislation, and that was signed into law by George W. Bush. I mean, that's what happens when people actually show up for democracy. And, what's happening now is people aren't showing up. And when only half the people show up, it means that big money like Koch brothers or anybody else, all they have to do is spend money to get a larger turnout for their side. And then that side wins, even though they may not represent the country at large.
And we get the art of the joke in there running the country. Sorry, I had to play that off of your artichoke because into this. So how do we get people, what can our listeners do right now to show up for what you're doing with Virtual Country and the National Town Square?
Two things. One is read the book. Okay, go to virtualcountry.us. And if for any reason, finances are such that you can't really afford even the download, just contact me. They can do it through you, or you can reach me at richard@virtualcountry.us, and I'll send you a PDF for free. So it's not about making money selling books. This is about getting the idea out. And the book is the most efficient way of doing that because it contains the questions and answers that have come up over the course of decades. So it's there. So number one, read the book. Number two, there's a place that you can access. You can link to it through virtualcountry.us, or you can go directly to nationaltownsquare.us. Please note, both of these are .us, not .com, .us. And at nationaltownsquare.us, you can pre-register to open a voting account. So the National Town Square is not live yet, and we anticipate it being live within the year, within a year from now. So in the meantime, if you pre-register, you'll get periodic updates on progress, on announcements about interviews like this one, and also next Monday I'm going to be interviewed on the Tom Hartman show at 11 a.m. on Lincoln's birthday, interestingly enough.
Oh, cool.
And so tell your friends about it. Again, virtualcountry.us tells you about the book, about the strategy. There's a couple of buttons where you can, connect and get a copy. So that's one thing. The next thing is, if you who are listening is in a position of being able to make some other kind of contribution. I don't know what that is. I mean, it may be a financial contribution. It may be that someone, like I got a call yesterday from someone who's running for public office in California that wants to associate with this movement. This is the democracy movement. It's not the virtual country movement. It's the democracy movement, real democracy. And so, if you're someone who has resources you think would benefit, then please contact me. But I humbly request, please read the book all the way through. It's not very long, but it's going to address a lot of questions, and that makes any subsequent communication much more efficient.
Yeah, it's really well done, Richard. I mean, I read through it in just a couple of hours, and it lays out the whole program very passionately and very succinctly. So I appreciate that. So one other things you can all do out there to get this movement rolling even faster is share this episode with friends and family and people that you think would be interested, so that they can hear from Richard directly. And we will, by the way, have all the links that he just mentioned in the show notes here. So use this to push out to your folks to help continue to build this virtual country and get our democracy back in our hands. get our representatives hearing our stories instead of us just being blasted with their narratives, right, wrong, indifferent, whatever that is. Make your voice heard. And I think this is just a wonderful way to get rolling with it. Thank you, Richard. And I appreciate you being here. I know you got a ton on your plate. You're traveling all around the country. You're on other shows. So I really appreciate you coming on Business of Story with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Park. I really appreciate it. And, perhaps we'll reconnect again in a few months and kind of update everybody on how it's going.
Would love to. I'm going to be up your way here in a couple months. And so Michelle and I hopefully find some time, can swing by and see you and Lisa and hear what's happening. I can bring back the update to our
Fantastic.
listeners. Thank you all for listening to this edition. Virtual Country Strategy for 21st Century Democracy. Download it right now. And like I said about Richard, he's not about the money. He's about connecting people. And so go to his site, download it, and he'll even send you a free one if you don't have the wherewithal to make that happen. But I appreciate you listening to this edition of Business of Story, trying to always bring you powerful story artists like Richard that are truly making a difference in the world, because that's really what we're all about, is trying to make a difference with our personal brand, to grow our influence, or our professional brands in our businesses, using them as vehicles to have a positive influence and impact with our employees, with our customers, with our country when it ultimately comes down to it. So that's what this show is all about. If I can be of service to you, visit me at businessofstory.com. Feel free to download any of those free resources and start getting your brand story straight right now. You have an important story to tell, and we're here to help you craft and tell it. Until next week, I want you to remember, of course, that the most potent story you are ever going to tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one, folks. We'll see you next week.